Welcome to the SDA Housing Podcast, brought to you by NDIS Property Australia. Before starting this episode, we need to provide a general disclaimer. Information contained in this podcast is general in nature only. It does not take into account the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. You need to consider your financial situation and needs before making any decisions based on the information in this podcast. And you should consider seeking independent and professional advice for your personal circumstances. All right, let's begin.
Hello everybody, my name is Debbie from NDIS Property Australia, and you're listening to the SDA Housing Podcast, a show that explains, highlights, guides and brings awareness about all things SDA in this ever-changing NDIS world. Today we have a special episode for you regarding the Cocoon saga. I'm sure that many of you will have heard of the permanent banning of Cocoon from the NDIS space. This has been an ongoing thing for quite a few weeks now, and certainly industry knowledge for much longer than that. But we wanted to sort of bring this together in a way that, in a timely way, to at least give listeners a bit more of an idea of what is going on. Now, there's been a lot of media attention over the last few weeks. The Australian has had, in the last 4 or 5 weeks, around 19 articles, different articles that they have published, along with all the other major media, newspapers and whatnot. So we actually took 5 of the articles from the Australian, which is a subscriber-only newspaper, so many people may not have had access to read them. And we actually got computer-generated summaries of each of those 5 articles, which we have collated and put together, the CGI audio summaries of those 5 specific articles, and collated them in this episode for you to listen to get a bit more of an understanding, really, just of what has been happening with this Cocoon saga. So hopefully this does clarify some of what the issues are for you listening. So listen on now.
Peter Wilson is the human face of NDIS abomination, blind, milked for cash, cut off from outside world. Peter Wilson is the human face of the cruelty and mismanagement of NDIS operator Cocoon SDA Care. The firm that was meant to care for Mr. Wilson wrongly drained his funds until he had nothing left. He was charged for services that were never provided, and overcharged for services that were provided. It meant he was robbed of the one thing in life that gave him pleasure: trips twice a week to his local Bunnings, where he would pet dogs, smell the plants and be greeted by staff like an old friend. It meant a supplier of essential incontinence products wasn't paid and would no longer supply him. As a result of Cocoon's refusal to refund the money it had overcharged Mr. Wilson, he has been stuck in his home for almost 4 months. His story is the most devastating example yet of what Cocoon's practices did to some of the most vulnerable people in the nation. They needed protection and help but were treated like a commodity. In the lead up to and during this scandal, Cocoon's leadership travelled the world, donated to politicians and attended awards nights celebrating themselves as running one of the nation's fastest growing and best places to work. Mr. Wilson, 55, a computer technician, had 2 strokes late in life, went blind and developed vascular dementia. He lives in 24-hour care in Adelaide. With Cocoon imploding, his devoted mother, Carol Wilson, has been concentrating on getting him into a new home and a new provider. But last weekend she sent the Australian an email outlining how her son had suffered. The 81-year-old came forward after the Australian referenced her son through the accounts of whistleblowers who were shocked at his treatment. The man in your Cocoon story sounds very much like my son Peter, who until recently had Cocoon as his provider, Ms. Wilson wrote. Cocoon stole what little joy he had in life: a few hours a week of community participation. Mr. Wilson would go on an outing with a carer to the local Bunnings for a coffee and hope to meet a customer in the garden section with a dog he would ask permission to pat, Ms. Wilson wrote. Cocoon not only reduced the funding he had for this simple pleasure, but his funding to buy necessary incontinence products. She learned that the care house team leader went out scouting for sanitary products on special and at op shops in her own time and spending her own money. The team leader refused to be compensated by Ms. Wilson, trusting that the company would soon come good and refund her. Cocoon throughout this time refused to repay a cent, Ms. Wilson said. They denied and stalled at every turn. As an aside, Cocoon are still sending invoices through for services they have never provided. Requests for them to desist have had no effect to date. Later, over the phone, Ms. Wilson said that twice a week, for 2 hours a day, a carer would take Mr. Wilson out of his home on his favourite outing, to Bunnings. This carer had nothing to do with Cocoon and was arranged by Ms. Wilson independently through the support worker website Mabel. What Ms. Wilson only discovered later was that Cocoon was falsely claiming it too was taking her son out of his home. Cocoon was charging the NDIS for 4 hours a day, 3 days a week of community participation, or 12 hours a week total. Ms. Wilson, who visited her son almost daily, knew his carers well and kept a daily journal, knew Cocoon was not taking him out on those days. I had all the journal entries of what Peter was doing on each day that the claims were made, and they coincided with him having COVID and him going to hospital for this and that. So I had a lot of evidence, and I still have, she said. Further, Cocoon was claiming it took Mr. Wilson out for 4 hours on Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays. But on Wednesdays and Fridays, Mr. Wilson was out of his home with the Mabel worker who had nothing to do with Cocoon. He could only be out for 2 hours at a time because he couldn't last any longer than that. He was exhausted after that. He had to go back and go to bed, Ms. Wilson said. After a period, the money to take Mr. Wilson out of his home and to purchase hygiene products ran out. When Ms. Wilson questioned a Cocoon manager, she was told that was the way the firm did things so that it could charge less for rent, and that the NDIS was good with that. Company insiders and other NDIS sources said this was not how the scheme worked. Ms. Wilson went back through the invoices and calculated that Cocoon charged Mr. Wilson $59,197 for community participation it didn't provide. Issues were only discovered because a support coordinator started asking questions about the plan. On top of the false community participation charges, Cocoon was also charging Mr. Wilson at the higher rate for high-intensity care 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The support coordinator believed Mr. Wilson should only have been on the high-intensity rate for an hour a week when he was getting diabetes and weight loss drug Ozempic injections. My support coordinator said, if we get them to give this back, Peter will be in the clear. He'll have plenty of money, Ms. Wilson said. Try as they might, they could not get Cocoon to repay the money. With Ms. Wilson's blessing, the support coordinator filed a report with the NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission in late February this year before going on leave. Ms. Wilson said that when she followed up with the Commission in mid-March, she was told, "We haven't received it." On March 18th, Carol gave a statement to the National Disability Insurance Agency's Fraud Unit. At a meeting on April 23rd, the company offered to repay a fraction of what it had wrongly charged. Ms. Wilson declined. The support coordinator called the meeting a disaster as they walked out. "We knew we weren't going to get any money," Ms. Wilson said. The next morning, a Cocoon manager who attended the meeting phoned to apologise and to say she could not look me in the eye at the meeting and had later handed in her resignation. The callousness of Cocoon's senior management contrasted with the dedication and care of staff, including frontline workers. When the company stopped paying its own staff in March, Mr. Wilson's carers would still turn up, shift after shift, to provide care. Mr. Wilson's NDIS funding would otherwise have easily covered his twice-weekly excursions to Bunnings, a modest expense that delivered a lot of emotional benefit. It's close by, the doors are automatic, they get disability parking near the door, the aisles are wide and so on, Ms. Wilson said. The little cafeteria there is all spaced out, the tables were brilliant. They had the Daily Advertiser newspaper there for you to read, and he was very good with long-term quizzes. The people that are on duty in the cafeteria and around, they've got to know him. They'd come up and say, "Hi, Peter." Wendy, the Mabel worker, would pick off a little bit of mint or something and rub his fingers with it and ask him what he thought it was. He met all the dogs that were in there, because they allow animals in if they are under control. We've got photos of him nursing animals with a great, big smile. I had to dismiss her in the end because we ran out of funds and we were owing Mabel, and I've had to pay that out of my own money. I've had to pay a lot of things out of my own money to get out of this. Mr. Wilson has not been out of his home for community participation since the end of January. It set him back, you know, Ms. Wilson said. Like, you sit all that time, not seeing, not understanding what's going on. He knew Wendy's voice. They had their own little jokes. He was starting to get really quite fun and cheeky with her, and she just delighted in that. Cocoon is now suspended after site visits this month identified serious safeguarding concerns. It is facing a proposed permanent ban for alleged inappropriate charging for services to prisoners and the dead. Founder Zaffar Khan said in a statement on Monday that the firm's payment plans for Mr. Wilson aligned with the expenses we incurred. He claimed an acknowledged error occurred here and was self-detected by Cocoon, and we initiated corrective action and reporting to the agency. He added, contrary to the consistent attitude displayed by the agency, this incident demonstrates Cocoon's good faith conduct and the existence of rigorous internal cross-checks. The refund has been finalised through the appropriate administrative channels, and we communicated this outcome to the relevant parties. We acknowledge an NDIS participant has been inconvenienced, and that is stressful for them and doesn't reach the service standard we wish to fulfil. This process has now concluded, and we can confirm that appropriate refunds have been initiated in line with our compliance obligations. Mr. Wilson's first stroke was in 2021, and his second in May 2023. He moved into a Cocoon home in July that year. Ms. Wilson said that, as Cocoon fell apart, the firm suggested he move to a new company, Essential Care Services. That company is owned by Khan's son-in-law, Jawad Shah, who is married to his daughter Fariha. Mr. Wilson is now with a different provider in emergency accommodation, and his community participation funding is being restored. His former external carer is due to take him back to Bunnings this week. Contact David Murray at murray@theaustralian.com.au. Inside a Cocoon, NDIS services carefree. The clue is in the name, Cocoon, a silk shell that shields the slowly fattening insect within from discovery and harm. Cocoon SDA Care is a disability provider whose unscrupulous practices are finally being exposed to the glare of public attention. For years its puppet master, Zaffar Khan, has been able to grow while moving from one cowboy company to the next. All the while, he's stayed off the books and a step ahead of authorities, discarding the used shell of one company to emerge in another guise. How he has been able to do this repeatedly, leaving vulnerable clients locked out of their homes, staff unpaid and a trail of distraught investors, goes to the heart of rising concerns about the $48.5 billion a year National Disability Insurance Scheme. Like Khan's empire, the NDIS has grown very big, very fast, becoming one of the largest weights on the federal budget, with regulators clearly struggling to keep pace. According to some of those who know Khan, the 66-year-old former taxi driver and ex-bankrupt wanted to ride the NDIS tidal wave he saw coming. Zaffar just wanted to tap in because of the funding, says a company insider. It was the big hype, the next Medicare. He was saying it would be the next big thing. 5 years ago, Khan's longtime business partner Mohammed Latif bought a tiny family-run NDIS business advertised on Gumtree, a site that might normally be associated with sales of tools and garden furniture. It was called Melbourne Carers and provided minor care for only 5 clients. It attracted Khan for the sole reason it already had types of NDIS registration that the fledgling Cocoon group of companies didn't have. Cocoon was already delivering an around-the-clock service prior to buying Melbourne Carers, but when there was an issue in their billing, it dawned they didn't have the right NDIS registration for that level of care, the insider says. It was highlighted to Zaffar that we cannot invoice these services, the insider says. All of a sudden, there was a call, we've got a new company now, it's called Melbourne Carers. The former owners of Melbourne Carers, Demet Aden and her husband Hakan, say they received a call from Latif responding to their ads. Latif asked about the business's registration, then paid a 10% deposit of $6,000 on the spot, Demet says. 2 of Demet's NDIS clients were sisters with vision impairment. The other 3 were women and a youth with intellectual disability. Demet helped them with basic chores and took them out into the community, until selling the business to Latif. Khan then offered her a job, which she declined. They weren't interested in my customers, Demet says of the men. They told me to let my customers go, to thank them and give them a present. Path to riches. Purchasing the small Melbourne business with its pre-approved registration in early 2020 cleared the way for Khan to immediately bill the NDIS for more services, rather than waiting 18 months, the insider says. In the company's Brisbane headquarters, staff worked on developing a new name suitable for a national organisation, settling on Connecting Abilities Australia. Khan was happy during that time because he was seeing money coming in and houses were starting to get filled, the insider says. He could be very grandiose in business meetings. He would say, "When we go public, I'll give you shares. We will become the largest NDIS company in Australia. We will dominate the market." The insider adds, Zaffar is always in charge. Latif is director figurehead. Investors were brought in by Khan's big promises, only to find out they're not getting their returns. As a result of Khan's spruiking, some investors built houses that were never or only briefly occupied, sources say. The fallout resulted in ongoing litigation. Meanwhile, the business lacked necessary staff such as an experienced human resources manager. "I told Zaffar you were growing too fast," the insider says. "There was no structure inside. I didn't even know whether our contracts were valid. He'd just purchase another template, put the logo there, and have it signed. Quick failure." Unsurprisingly, Connecting Abilities performed disastrously in successive NDIS audits and faced a catastrophe. The audits assessed key areas including safeguarding using a scale ranging from 0 for major nonconformities to 3 for best practice. Any nonconformities could lose a business its certification. Connecting Abilities Australia registered up to 16 major nonconformities in May 2021, the Australian revealed this week. That level of failure was described as nuts by one person involved in the audit system. When the auditors returned 3 months later, in August, it was immediately apparent little had changed. Safe environment, management of medication, risk management and governance all recorded zeros. Red, the colour of warning, was used to highlight failures. The independent auditor's report was a sea of red ink. By the time of the audit, the small family-run business purchased on Gumtree was offering services in Victoria, Queensland, South Australia and Western Australia. It had 26 separate sites, despite only disclosing 10 to the auditors. But Khan's and Latif's business was unfit to operate. The auditors found they were a critical risk to the community and recommended to the watchdog, the NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission, that the company be stripped of its accreditation. "That audit is the messiest I have seen," the insider says. "The people inside, we were kind of like flying the airplane and fixing the wing mid-flight. Overnight we're creating documents because we know we do not have them. We were then flagged big time about major non-conformance. Documentation and screening was even missing for Latif and Cocoon's advisory board chairman, former Howard Government Minister Gary Hardgrave. Hardgrave this week told The Australian that, as of last Friday, he had parted company with Cocoon. Disabilities rookie. Zaffar in the beginning had no real understanding of NDIS services, according to the insider who speaks on condition of anonymity. People were being hired with no regard for worker screening, qualifications or experience. One woman was just playing volleyball at the time, and someone approached her and asked if she wanted a caring job, the insider says. Zaffar is not an NDIS person. Tapping into these kind of services, you really need to know what you're doing. You will hurt people if you don't know the industry. I was really surprised it took the NDIS so long to flag Cocoon. In March 2022, the NDIS Commission refused to renew Connecting Abilities Australia's registration. But Khan and Latif remained in the sector. Cocoon SDA Care is the company that has been in the headlines over the past fortnight, after the Australian revealed it had failed to pay staff including frontline care workers and was under investigation by agencies from a federal fraud task force. A manual National Disability Insurance Agency audit of all NDIS payment claims by Cocoon SDA Care's parent company, Horizon SolSolutions, has been underway since March. Latif is sole director of both companies, but as always the person pulling the strings is Khan, sources say. Khan denies it, saying on Friday that he is just the strategic advisor and day-to-day control and executive decisions are handled by the appointed director. He adds, "Care and safeguarding of NDIS participants has always been our highest priority. We have been regularly audited by NDIS Commission-approved auditors, and we maintain strong internal quality complaint and management systems. NDIA staff said under cross-examination in the federal court they had found no instances of fraud or inappropriate behaviour, Khan says. However, the court was told the NDIA investigation that began last October and has become the biggest of its kind in the agency was ongoing. Whistleblower hits out. Former Cocoon Chief Executive Tanya Quinn this week alleged that Cocoon was using new investor cash to create an illusion of success. Horizon's latest financial report states it earned more than $100 million in NDIS support services funding in 2023 and 2024. But with independent auditors warning the financials are barely worth the paper they were written on, many questions remain. Participants were at risk for years, Quinn said this week. Staff were underpaid, untrained, and eventually abandoned. The ones who spoke up? Threatened or fired. The NDIS Commission suspended Horizon's registration for 30 days last week after recent site visits discovered serious safeguarding concerns. But even before then, with the walls closing in, Cocoon was scrambling to move the care of people with disabilities to other companies with related directors or shareholders. Khan was shedding his shell again. Contracts obtained by the Australian show the companies to which Cocoon was seeking to transition clients. One was Essential Care Services, owned by Khan's son-in-law, Shah Jawad, married to his daughter Fariha. Another was Caring for All Abilities, owned by another of Khan's daughters, Amayman Zaffar, who shares a residential address with him. Yet another is a company it calls Crescent Disability Services in documents obtained by the Australian. But the business ABN cited is for Crescent Respite Facility, owned by Cocoon Executive Director Pranay Kumar and previously owned by Fariha. The real victims. NDIS support coordinator and disability advocate Liz Spagan has witnessed the effects of this turmoil firsthand. One of her clients is a woman in her 50s with impairments from a stroke, living in a Horizon home with her care being managed by Cocoon SDA Care. That was until last week, when Horizon's NDIS registration was suspended. The woman's care needs were transferred to a new provider while she stayed in the same supported accommodation in Queensland's southeast. At home alone on Friday, May 9th, her client answered the door to a removalist who had been sent without notice to collect household items provided as part of her boarding agreement. That included the dryer, the microwave, and a bed in the support worker's room. The fridge was only left behind because the woman refused to unpack her recently purchased groceries. She phoned Spagan in tears afterwards. The worst thing was they turned up when our participant had no one else there. She was traumatised, Spagan says. She's got left side paralysis. She's sitting there emptying the sideboard so he can take it back. Police came later but said it was a civil disagreement and they couldn't intervene. On Monday this week the woman phoned Spagan again and said the same guy's here to take the laptop and phone. The woman's food card was cut off, and there are concerns her electricity could be too. This is cowboy stuff, isn't it? Spagan says. Cocoon tried to transition the woman to Essential Care Services, owned by Khan's son-in-law. Street sign legacy. In Zaffar Avenue at Park Ridge in Logan, two partially built homes on land owned by Khan's wife, Veena Basra, symbolise a dream that has not made it to reality. The homes sit next to a greenfield development site in Treasurer Jim Chalmers' electorate south of Brisbane. Khan told people he had a 100-year plan to turn this rectangle of land, on a street named after him, into an empowerment village for people living in supported disability care. In Queensland, developers can nominate street names, and Zaffar must have been happy for his own to be put forward. A side street that branches off his own is named Fariha Way, after his daughter. But last October, his wife Basra's company quietly sold the majority of the land to an unrelated developer for $16.5 million. Khan and his wife kept some lots, including the land with homes under construction, where temporary fencing bears the NDIS logo. Logan Mayor John Raven was excited by the potential of the innovative business and its stated goal of doing good in the community. He visited Cocoon's HQ at 8 Mile Plains and promoted it on social media. Raven said this week his thoughts were for affected staff and people on the NDIS in the company's care. Khan insists that his empowerment village dream is unrelated to the NDIS and still alive. Zoning restrictions in that area would prevent the development to occur in the location that had been identified, he says. We continue the search for a more suitable location. Contact David Murray at murray@theaustralian.com.au. NDIS for prisoners a suspected rort, says head of probe into Cocoon SDA care. Federal authorities formed a preliminary view a troubled disability firm at the centre of a major investigation needed to pay back money for claims that it provided NDIS services to prisoners. The National Disability Insurance Agency Fraud Unit's serious and complex non-compliance team discovered during initial inquiries into Cocoon SDA care that its parent company, Horizon SolSolutions Australia, made claims for services to the incarcerated, court documents state. We obtained records for these NDIS participants from Melbourne Assessment Prison and Barwon Prison, team leader Karen McDonald states in an affidavit obtained by The Australian. These confirmed they were incarcerated at the relevant time and that Horizon had claimed they had provided services to them. Based on this, SCNC formed a preliminary view that a debt was owed to the agency by Horizon. Horizon was told of the finding on March 6 this year and was provided with an opportunity to comment or provide additional information before a debt invoice was raised, she added. Horizon's response was due to the NDIA on Friday. The documents were filed in the federal court as part of Horizon's attempts to force the NDIA to stop holding up its NDIS payments. A major NDIA investigation was launched into the company following whistleblower complaints and tip-offs about its operations, leading to all of the company's claims for payments since early March being manually reviewed. Watchdog, the NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission, is conducting its own investigations into Cocoon and has suspended the business's operations for 30 days following targeted site visits that identified safety concerns. Cocoon's lawyers have told the federal court that services could be provided to prisoners remotely, including by phone and video through an iPad, and that there may have been a misunderstanding in the NDIA over what could be claimed for. Ms. McDonald in her affidavit stated that with more participants joining the NDIS, there has been an increase in fraud and criminal activity. The agency was cracking down, doing more work to review claims before they were paid. Thousands of tip-offs have been received this financial year to date. Loss of money to non-compliance or fraud reduces the amount of funding available to protect participant safety and prevent financial loss to the scheme, she stated. Tip-offs about Cocoon included that it was managed by someone other than the company director, who had previously declared bankruptcy, she stated. The company had also been accused of trading while insolvent and enticing specialist disability accommodation investors, with promises of unrealistic investment returns. Money from investors for SDA investment was also allegedly used by the company for its own operations and private use, and the company continued to charge a support service fee after the death of participants, according to the tip-offs. The NDIA's Intelligence and Analytics Branch referred Horizon to Ms. McDonald's team for assessment on January 3, 2024, the affidavit states. It was another 9 months before a case officer was allocated, on October 8, 2024. The agency had reviewed financial reports submitted to ASIC. These included an independent auditor's report from Trigun's Business Advisory that raised many concerns about the state of the company's record-keeping and the unavailability of key supporting documentation. The agency became aware on December 3, 2024, that the NDIS Commission had issued 3 infringement notices to Horizon more than a year earlier, on November 9, 2023. It was alleged Horizon failed to pay rent to owners of SDA and SIL, supported independent living, resulting in participants being locked out of their residences, requiring alternative emergency accommodation, the affidavit states. It confirms prior reporting in The Australian about 3 women with complex disability care needs returning to their home in South Australia to discover padlocks on the gate. Cocoon's co-founder and corporate strategist, a former bankrupt and taxi driver, Zaffar Khan, was controlling the company, whistleblowers say. Mr. Khan and the sole director of Cocoon and Horizon, Mohammed Latif, have denied any wrongdoing. Bill Shorten warned over Cocoon SDA Care NDIS scandal in 2023. A whistleblowing former chief executive of Cocoon SDA Care sent then NDIS Minister Bill Shorten messages in 2023 alerting him to serious concerns about the disability care business, which is now facing investigations into broad-ranging allegations. Tanya Quinn has come forward with an extraordinary account of her fleeting experience as head of Cocoon, a business that has raked in tens of millions of dollars of national disability insurance scheme funding as it cares for some of the nation's most vulnerable people. After becoming alarmed about the practices she was seeing and about allegations being raised by senior staff, she sent Mr. Shorten a message on LinkedIn. "Good morning, Bill. I'm writing to you to request an urgent meeting with you and your staff as I believe I have uncovered the largest NDIS scandal to date," she wrote. "I am the CEO of Cocoon SDA Care, just appointed on Monday, with between 1,000 to 1,600 staff and hundreds of occupied SDA, specialist disability accommodation, homes and a turnover of 50 million plus." The message, sent on August 4, 2023, went on to outline serious allegations regarding the governance of the company and alleged investor rip-offs. There seemed to be concerns around how the firm passed a midterm NDIS audit, as there are no basic processes followed and they didn't pick this shadow director as key personnel who runs the full operation, she added. The shadow director referred to as former bankrupt Zaffar Khan, who Ms. Quinn and other company insiders say was running the business. Ms. Quinn told The Australian that despite also speaking to responsible federal agencies, she believed other whistleblower executives weren't contacted and that her concerns were not fully investigated at the time. The federal court was last week told the National Disability Insurance Agency launched an investigation into Cocoon's parent company Horizon SolSolutions last October, and that it had become the largest operation of its kind. "You've just got the tip of the iceberg there," she said of The Australian's reporting on the company over the past 2 weeks. "I've been waiting for this for 2 years. I've given all this information. NDIS have had it, Bill Shorten's office has had it, since August 2023. Federal authorities received 32 tip-offs about Cocoon and Horizon from late November 2020 to early February this year, The Australian has reported. Ms. Quinn was one of the whistleblowers. She was previously in contact with Mr. Shorten in her role at another organisation providing NDIS services. On the same day as her original message to the Minister about Cocoon, she received a personal response from Mr. Shorten's Deputy Chief of Staff and Press Secretary Antonia McGee. "Hi Tanya, I work for Bill Shorten. He has asked me to call you. Give me a call when you can." Ms. Quinn also disclosed information to the NDIA the same day and was contacted by a senior intelligence analyst soon after, emails show. She sent another message to Mr. Shorten on September 12, 2023. "I appreciate your assistance, but nothing has been done from NDIS to stop these guys from trading and taking advantage of vulnerable people or investors. 8 people have lost their jobs as a result of whistleblowing," she wrote. On October 4, 2023, she wrote to Mr. Shorten again, taking issue with an NDIS Commission social media post that encouraged people to take advantage of whistleblower protections. What whistleblower protections? "Single mum of a child with a disability myself, down $250K a year. That's what you get for doing the right thing." Mr. Shorten's advisor Daniel White replied the same day. "Thank you for your engagement and ongoing contact with the National Disability Insurance Agency regarding this issue. The Australian government will not tolerate the misuse of funds intended to support people with disability. Unfortunately, for legal and operational reasons, our office can't comment on any fraud compliance investigations that may result from a tip-off. However, we have asked the NDIA to make contact with you today." She told The Australian she initially did consulting work with Cocoon for 6 or 7 weeks. "They knew they were in some trouble, looking back now. They said, we've made mistakes. They were just, I think, in over their heads. It became clear to her that Mr. Khan, the business's co-founder, was in charge." She referred to the other co-founder and sole director Mohammed Latif as more like an employee, with limited say over the company. Many of her comments align with information provided separately to The Australian by other company insiders. Mr. Khan previously went bankrupt in New Zealand after his taxi business went bust. He is also listed on Australia's National Personal Insolvency Index as having a personal insolvency agreement to settle debts, executed on August 31, 2020, The Australian can reveal. Personal insolvency agreements are legally binding and can be a way of avoiding bankruptcy. This individual is subject to the provision of Part 10 of the Bankruptcy Act, Index Records state. A personal insolvency agreement has been accepted by creditors. Ms. Quinn said, "Latif doesn't have, really, any say in anything that goes on in that organisation. You can't buy a pen without Zaffar signing off on it. Zaffar hired me. They flew me up to Queensland to meet Zaffar. And probably about 2 weeks after I met him, he offered me the CEO role. He said he needed, like, a white face because people didn't trust him, because he looks like a cab driver. They met through a lawyer who was a mutual friend. She was told Mr. Khan had turned over a new leaf and was wanting to do some good for the community. Some of the names associated with the company, including former Howard Government Minister Gary Hardgrave, impressed her. It was all smoke and mirrors. When I went up there, I got the sense everybody was brand new. I thought that was a bit of a red flag, she said. The business was almost like a cult, with people telling Mr. Khan what he wanted to hear. Her executive assistant manager and human resources manager from her previous organisation joined her. When we sort of looked at the way they were onboarding people, I was like, right, that's not compliant, she said. It seemed as though everyone that she spoke to was fresh, and they just seemed like they were wanting to have a conversation with me, she said. People were saying, oh, thank God you're not related to him, and I've just got this concern, or I've noticed this, or I've noticed that. The whole team was coming to me, saying, we've got concerns about this, that, and the other, so I just took a bunch of notes. Then I immediately called a meeting with other employees, and they just sang like canaries. The staff raised concerns about the company, as well as their concerns for hundreds of investors in Australia and overseas. Going through the financial records, she had questions about the company's solvency. She downloaded material including bank statements. It was a mess, just an absolute mess, she said. I downloaded everything I could. I went directly to Bill Shorten, went to ASIC, went to Quality and Safeguards, ATO. Just gave them all the information I had, and then nothing happened. When I followed up, I had a meeting at the NDIS Commission, and they took the details and said, we'll call you, we'll get you back in to sign your statement. And then they never, ever did. And I'm still waiting. 7 or 8 people lost their jobs as a result of coming forward, and she had been offered no protection, she said. I saw something online where the NDIS Commission was talking about protections for whistleblowers, she said. I sort of responded to him. I said, you're misrepresenting the situation. I came forward with what I think is like a massive scandal, and I think I've got evidence. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars and you've offered me nothing, no protection. Ms. Quinn said the company threatened legal action against her. I had to pay for my own legal team to represent me. And NDIS have done absolutely nothing, she said. Ms. Quinn was an independent candidate in the federal election in the seat of Parramatta, campaigning on the NDIS. Her campaign material described the NDIS as broken, bloated and buried in paperwork. Mr. Khan said on Tuesday morning that Ms. Quinn was contracted to work as chief executive and she filled that role for a few days. He added, during her contract, alleged issues and incidents regarding her conduct were raised by staff with management. These were investigated and her contract subsequently ended. Cocoon operates with a strong internal complaints and reportable incident management scheme, and we will act on and investigate any issues that might arise which could undermine our values and commitment to safety and quality. Ms. Quinn said Mr. Khan's comments were absolute rubbish and that all her statements were backed by documents. A manual NDIA audit of Horizon's NDIS claims has left it unable to pay staff, but some workers say they are discovering superannuation missing going back to at least last year. The company last year avoided bankruptcy by reaching an agreement to pay off an almost $10 million debt to the tax office. Cocoon SDA Care founders were behind firm that failed NDIS audits. A company linked to the 2 men behind troubled disability care provider Cocoon SDA Care failed multiple NDIS accreditation audits 4 years ago and was subsequently rejected for re-registration. Critical risks were identified in 2021 in the services being offered to people with disabilities by Connecting Abilities Australia Party Limited, according to documents cited by the Australian and sources who spoke on condition of anonymity. Up to 16 major and serious faults were detected in one audit of the business, with a follow-up audit discovering many issues had not been fixed months later. This resulted in independent auditors telling the NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission that Connecting Abilities was not recommended for accreditation. The business was rapidly expanding at the time, offering services to people on the NDIS in Victoria, Queensland, South Australia and Western Australia. It was previously known as Melbourne Carers but was bought out in 2020 by one of Mohammed Latif's companies. Mr. Latif and former taxi driver Zaffar Khan are co-founders of Cocoon SDA Care, a business facing major investigations into its operations. Despite the serious accreditation failures at Connecting Abilities, Cocoon's parent company Horizon SolSolutions Australia was able to rake in more than $100 million in NDIS support services funding in 2023 and 2024. A person familiar with the NDIS audit system said Connecting Abilities' high number of faults, known as major non-conformances, was extreme and alarming. Normally, if somebody gets 2, that would be considered as fairly serious. 16 is nuts, the person said. During the audit process, it was discovered that there were many more sites than had been initially advised, and also more NDIS participants. This was of crucial relevance because the number of people on the NDIS with any provider helps determine how many participants are interviewed by auditors. Significant turnover of key staff members, including senior managers, was also noted, as was Mr. Khan's move from an apparent executive chairman role to a contractor providing strategic advice. Among many issues identified by auditors was the lack of evidence of risk management, including risks to vulnerable people with disabilities. Policies and procedures were not suitable for the scale of the business and the complexity of the services it offered, and there was no disaster plan or business continuity plan, auditors found. There were concerns about the management of medication incidents, the monitoring of medication errors, and the lack of procedures for administering laxatives, enemas, and suppositories. Claims in the company's manual that its staff would have certain medical knowledge were not backed up by documented evidence of training. The NDIS Commission refused Connecting Abilities Australia Party Ltd's application for renewal of its registration in March 2022, the Australian has been told. The Commission has declined to comment, saying an open investigation is underway. The former owners of Melbourne Carers were Victorian couple Harkan and Demet Aiden. Mr. Aiden on Monday told The Australian that when he advertised the business for sale in early 2020 during the COVID pandemic, it had 5 clients. I think we put it on Gumtree or somewhere. After a few offers, this guy didn't even negotiate. He paid the deposit straight away over the phone, he said. Mr. Latif bought the business, but a man named Zaffar was also involved in the purchase, Mr. Aiden said. My wife spoke to Zaffar a few times after the sale because he wanted to employ her as a manager to look after SDA's specialist disability accommodation, he said. The business passed an NDIS audit shortly before the sale, Mr. Aiden said. We got audited, everything was fine. Obviously, in that line of business, you can't just get anyone to audit. You find one of the NDIA's, National Disability Insurance Agency's, approved auditors. We were just a small, simple, basic business. Mr. Khan and Mr. Latif have denied any wrongdoing. Asked last week if Cocoon was deliberately overcharging the NDIS, Mr. Khan said, never. Not even 1%. Not even 1 cent. Not even $1. No one can prove it. And NDIS has tried its best. We are a pretty transparent company. Do you know more about this story? Contact David Murray on murray@theaustralian.com.au.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please make sure you are subscribed and following us so you can keep in the loop with all of our upcoming episodes. We would really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star rating, a written review, and to share this podcast with those that could benefit. Until next time, catch you on the next episode.